Hello everyone, this is Robert and this is my new printer enclosure for my Prusa MK3S. This comes from a company called Prusabox out of the UK, and this is called the Prusabox, aptly named. So in this video what I want to accomplish is kind of give you an overview of my experience putting this thing together, because it is a kit, putting it together, going through the mods, configuring it, and all of that good stuff. I'm not going to go into crazy high levels of detail, but please check out the chapters down below in this video so you can kind of jump around. There's a lot of different enclosures on the market for the MK3S, so I just kind of want to give you my experiences with putting this one together. This video is not affiliated or sponsored in any way. This is just, kind of my experiences with this thing. So let's dive right into the Prusabox enclosure. So let's start off with why you might want an enclosure. An enclosure is nice because it reduces the sound. You can see here that I'm printing a Benchy right now, and there's really not that much noise. I don't even know if it can pick up on the mic, but you can reduce the noise. You can also isolate the vibration, which is nice. So if you have this, on a surface, I have this in the shelf in my office, and it kind of transmits some of that noise. So you can reduce the noise. You can also trap the heat inside, which has two added benefits. One, if you have materials like ABS, things like that want a heated enclosure, you can have a pseudo heated enclosure. We'll kind of talk about that later, because this is not really a true heated enclosure, but you can do that. For filaments like nylon, they do kind of like to be isolated from drafts. So this will isolate from drafts. Anything I do here will not, go and impact the heat inside the chamber. So that is also nice. And you can also keep the fumes and the smells inside. If you're doing dangerous materials, I think like ABS is one of them. There's a couple others that you don't really want to be breathing any of the fumes that come from this. So you can keep all of this inside the enclosure. So that's kind of why the enclosure. One of the reasons why I picked up this particular enclosure was the Octoprint integration. So I have a Raspberry Pi inside of here with the touchscreen, and all the control surfaces are right there. The other thing that is kind of nice about this is it's pseudo sealed, as I kind of mentioned before. So the power supply gets relocated, the screen gets relocated, and you can actually keep the inside of this relatively warm. So that's kind of why I ended up with this. There's also a lot of options for modifications, which I'll get into that later. The modifications aren't as good as I thought that they would be. I think most of them should just honestly be standard. I'm not sure who is building this just as the stock enclosure. The modifications seem just like they should be the things that you build with the enclosure. So anyway, I'll get into that. But there is also a lot of other convenience things. So like you notice, I have the spool holder in there. I've got the lights on. There's just a nice lot of little convenience features that this offers, and I'll get into those when I talk about the features. So let's talk about cost. How much does this whole thing cost? So let's talk about how much this thing costs, because if you just look at the enclosure cost, that's one thing, but it kind of adds up, and I think you might be surprised. So I got the black version. There's two versions. There's the powder coated black, and then there's just kind of the bare stainless. And in my opinion, the bare stainless really doesn't look all that good. It looks really unfinished and kind of sloppy. So I went with the black one, of course, with all black everything, because I don't know, I want it to be all black. So I paid a little over $300 just for the enclosure from them. And what you get is the metal pieces. These are, I think, laser cut steel that is stamped and folded or folded. So it's actually really, really decent metal pieces that you get. And then you also get the hardware, and then you get these door panels, and that's it. All the other pieces you have to print on your own. So I paid a little over $300, I think like $315, something like that, with exchange rates at the time of filming. Keep that in mind. But there are a tremendous amount of 3D printed components for this. Like, I'll get into that later, but obnoxiously so. Every single thing is 3D printed. It was 2 full spools of filament, so about $30 a piece, plus the time and electricity. It took me over 2 weeks to print everything. Yep. So about $60 worth of that. And then with the mods on everything, I spent another $250 just on parts. There's so many things here. Like you have the power supply for the Octoprint, you have this little fan controller and the fan speed controller for the temperature of the chamber. You've got a HEPA fan back there, that was like 25 bucks. Then you have the HEPA filters for that. You've got the buck converter to power the Raspberry Pi up front. You've got the touch screen. There's just a lot of extra little pieces. I mean, even like the feet aren't included in this kit, which is kind of weird. You're going to be using this with a Prusa MK3S. It doesn't include the feet. You got to get feet extra. So all those little extras add up, and I spent about $250. Now, in that price, I also went with black hardware. They give you stainless hardware, which is kind of weird for a black printer. It looked to me kind of funky with, you know, the two-tone. So I ended up just getting the black fasteners for everything, but that was maybe 20 bucks of this. So yeah, the Octoprint side probably costs the most of that. However, in that $250, I do not have the Raspberry Pi or the SD card. So if you're looking to get a Raspberry Pi and an SD card, depending on the time of this filming, maybe add another $100, $150, or $50, depending on what the availability is, but that's gonna be another expense on there. So if you want the basic enclosure that has Octoprint integrated, has temperature control for the enclosure, which I don't think you can do it without it, because this is already up to 32 degrees since the start of this video. It gets warm in there without some sort of exhaust. And then the lights and just the other basics. I don't really have anything too crazy on here. I don't have a webcam or anything like that. So that's about $250 extra. So overall, you're about $600, not including the Raspberry Pi. If you have the Raspberry Pi and the webcam, you're probably well over $700 or $750 in total, and that's not including the printer. And I didn't go crazy with anything. I just bought all the stuff they suggested. So keep that in mind. You're gonna spend between $500 and $700 on this, depending on how you equip it. So let's talk about the assembly. This is a difficult section for me to talk about because I've already filmed this a couple times and I've been ranting for like 15 minutes. So let me try and sum things up. The assembly and build process is significantly more involved than you might be thinking. And I don't know if I would change anything going into this, but let me kind of give you some of the bullet points. The amount of 3D printed parts in this, I think, is just almost insulting. It is so many parts. For instance, you are printing T-nuts for the rails on some pieces. It's just, why? Why are you printing T-nuts? Please include the hardware. There seems to be no real attempt to include off-the-shelf hardware in this. You get a couple dowel pins for the doors, you get some fasteners, and you get some square nuts. That's it. So much of this design could lean more heavily on off-the-shelf hardware, and if they're selling these as kits, you can buy them in bulk and include them in the kits, and that is something that is a big gripe of mine. The assembly process is way too long, and the amount of 3D printed components, 2 solid weeks of printing just for what you see here, and it was about 2.5 weeks because I still didn't grab everything. It's just way too many pieces. Leverage off-the-shelf hardware more. The instructions were not always clear, and it might have been just timing, but when I was going through my build, they were actually changing and revising some of the 3D printed parts that I was currently printing. So I would print one piece to it, and then the next day when that was done, I would go to print the other piece, and that piece was gone on the downloads. They had, oh, a new updated one. Cool, now I got to reprint both of them. So I reprint both of them. The instructions don't reference the new one, the instructions only reference the old one, and the new ones have a lot of features. Oh, and they don't work well with the now mods that I printed, so I got to reprint those too. So there was just a lot of that stuff going on, and you really almost want to just take a snapshot, download everything, and print it all at once. But by the time you get done with it, the instructions might have changed. Their version control is very, very poor. So I ran into that. A lot of things just changing mid-build, which was really frustrating. Another thing is the mods don't all play well together. You'd think they kind of do play well together, but even in the basic configuration that I have, some of the things don't play well and they don't fit together. So I think that's interesting. I know the lighting instructions, the assembly for the lighting is over a really old version. It doesn't have this new version. It actually kind of wraps all the way back towards the back of the enclosure. It doesn't even look anything like what they have now, and it doesn't seem to address the fact that the spool holder can be mounted there. So yeah, just kind of an example. The assembly instructions are gonna be a roll of the dice. They might line up with the components you're downloading, and they may or may not show how it works or interacts with some of the other mods that you have. It definitely feels like it's a work in progress. The last thing I'll talk about, just because I gotta complain about this a little bit, is square nuts. Square nuts are very useful and they're very nice, but it seems like someone just discovered that square nuts exist and they are just everywhere. I mean, you go through almost an entire pack of 100, which it doesn't seem like that, but by the end your thumbs are numb because you're pressing these in. The thing about square nut design is if you're doing overhangs in PETG, you're never going to get a perfect fit. It's either going to be way too loose or way too tight because, you know, you're going to have these overhangs if you're printing them in weird directions. And so they're just kind of a pain in the butt to use. And I just want to let you guys know, Prusabox, if you're watching this video, plastic fasteners exist. You can use wood fasteners, you can use sheet metal fasteners, or trilobular fasteners, plastite fasteners. They make these. Yes, I know they're a little bit more expensive, but you can design around plastic fasteners. You don't have to tap anything, you don't have to do that. You can just have sheet metal, wood screws, or plastic fasteners for 3D printed. It'll work perfectly fine. The amount of design decisions that were based around trying to fit some weird square nut in some strange location, it just seemed like they were designing around the square nut rather than designing how it just needs to be designed. So I really wasn't thrilled to see that. I would rather them just discover that plastic fasteners are a thing and you can absolutely use them and they're totally sturdy, they can handle the load, you'll be totally fine. Plastic fasteners are great. So that's my last gripe. The assembly of this thing was just a journey, and I thought about ditching it and selling it many times during the process, but you know, I tend to be a little bit picky. Overall, I think the end result is good, but the assembly process sucked. So I'm calling this next section additional gripes, and I really apologize, but you know, there's just a couple other little things I gotta talk about, and then I'll talk about the good things. The doors. The doors are really flimsy. Let me just kind of show you. So they're really thin. They're really, really thin. And seeing as you're really only buying these metal pieces and the doors, that's kind of like the only thing you're buying other than the design, it just strikes me as a little bit weird that these are that thin. The other thing that kind of gets me is I was going to replace this door with a thicker piece. I was like, yeah, no big deal. I'll just get a bigger piece. This is like 12.5 by 14. They designed this. If they had just brought this up, I don't know, 1/4 of an inch and this down 1/4 of an inch or something like that, I could use a 12-inch piece that's off the shelf standard size. This doesn't line up with any size. So you have to basically buy a 24 by 24 inch sheet, which is like $80 to replace the door. So that kind of annoyed me a little bit. The doors are flimsier than I would like. I mean, it makes the whole thing feel a lot cheaper because the metal components are fantastic. Really, really high quality metal components, but the doors are really, really thin. The twist latches are okay, I think, on the sides, but for the door in the front, it's really annoying. Like you kind of see it takes time to get into the front, so I'm gonna replace this. I'm gonna do some kind of new mod for that, just have a handle. This whole thing is metal, magnets are a thing. I don't like these little twist locks for the up front. They're on every other panel, which is nice because you can remove them, but on the front access door, it's not my favorite thing in the world. Yeah, non-standard door size. The amount of 3D printed things, that's kind of a bummer for me. I was expecting it to include more hardware, you know, more things that I would be buying. I wouldn't be expected to supply it. That being said, you can buy the components 3D printed, but from my understanding is, depending on what mods you're gonna be doing, a lot of the 3D printed parts come from the additional mods that you're doing. So if you wanna do the LEDs, you wanna do the spool, you wanna do the Octoprint stuff, you're still gonna have to print that on your own. I could be wrong, maybe they'll offer kits for that, but I think they just offer kits for the standard stuff, which is, yeah, maybe only about half of the components that you need. I've already talked about the square nuts. The heated enclosure, this isn't really a proper heated enclosure. I actually have this sealed up right now. And it's at 33.6. That's about where I can kind of maintain it. This is printing PLA. The heated bed is your heat source for this. So you don't actually have a heater inside of here. It's just the heated bed and the other electronics that are heating this up. So if you want to get up to 60 degrees, which you can theoretically, if you want to get up to 60 degrees, you basically just got to crank the bed and wait for it to get up to there. There isn't an actual heater anywhere as an option. You can add one, you can design it, but that's all there is available. And the fan in the back, I think, yeah, I do actually have the fan on right now. It's pretty quiet, nice. The fan is just basically to keep it from ramping up. So it's not really a heated enclosure. And I've got the fan at max, and it is just maintaining at 33. It will not turn on and off. It will just kind of maintain it at 33, 34 degrees. So this isn't a proper heated enclosure to where you can actually cool it down and heat it up. You basically just let heat build up, and the fan will make sure it doesn't get too bad. So not a proper heat enclosure. And also this is not tied into Octoprint in any way whatsoever. These are completely separate controls. I don't know if you can see this from this side, but there's a controller over here that controls just the fan. That's it. So it really doesn't have a proper heated enclosure at all. Let's see. Yeah, not integrated with Octoprint. That's kind of a bummer. Oh, the standard feet on this are just kind of these little PETG pillars, and without these little TPU pads that I printed, the thing just kind of slides. It's not like it slides when it's printing, but it's, you know, PETG is kind of a little bit of a slippery, hard surface. So if you're on any kind of standard wood surface, if you press on the printer, it'll just kind of slide, and it's very slippery on that surface. So I just made these little TPU feet to where it could actually stay in place. I thought that was kind of interesting. They didn't really have anything for the actual feet. Last thing is the mods need to just be options. They kind of add them on like, oh, you might do these crazy things, but the heated enclosure, as I explained, if you don't have this little fan module in place, this thing will just cook inside. You will just heat this up and everything will just sit there and cook. So you kind of need the fan. If you don't have the LEDs on, you can't see anything inside. You know, it's just kind of little things like that. The mods are, I think, kind of necessary, so it'd be nice if they were the standard and then they would give you options to remove them if you didn't want them. I think that makes a little bit more sense. But in general, I think this is almost kind of, maybe other than the spool, I see this as kind of the bare minimum. Maybe you could remove Octoprint from it, but I think that's kind of the selling point to this. If you're not going to do Octoprint, I think there's maybe some other enclosures that might be a better way to go. So those are my gripes. Let's talk about the things I like about this. Okay, so I've spent the last 20 minutes kind of ripping on this. Let's talk about some of the nice things. The fit and the finish and the quality of the finished product is very, very good. The metal pieces are really well done. They line up very, very high quality. I've seen a lot of, you know, cheap kind of laser jet cut or plasma cut stuff. This is very, very nice. I really appreciate the quality and the attention to detail on the metal pieces. Everything lines up great. The 3D printed pieces, for the most part, for the main structure, the design of them is very good, and things do line up, and there is some good thought in that. I think the mods kind of get a little lost. I think maybe less attention to detail is spent on the mods, but the main structure and the main components are very good overall. Good fit and finish. It is overall very attractive. One of the things that I liked when I was searching for enclosures is this is very space conscious. It can fit basically on a 24-inch deep shelf, which is what I'm looking for, and it doesn't have a lot of wasted space. Some of the enclosures tend to be very, very bulky, but I think this is as compact as it can be. The bed comes all the way, almost all the way up to the front and all the way up to the back, and everything is very mindful of that. So, you know, if you're going to stack a bunch of these or if you're trying to fit these into a smaller space, I really do like that. It is quiet. You know, I've had this printing right next to me with a lav mic this entire time, and I bet people don't really remember or know that this has been printing. It is a lot quieter. The Mark 3S is not the quietest printer on the market, and this actually makes it quite a bit quieter, especially if you do these little TPU feet underneath. I really like how self-contained everything is. I'll be getting some shots about inside and everything throughout this video, but the fact that Octoprint is inside of here, there's nothing external to this printer, okay? So I've got your two power cables. This is the power supply for the inside, and this is for the actual printer. And I have one of these Wi-Fi switches down here that's plugged into for turning on and off the printer. But other than that, there's nothing external to this. If you've ever done an Octoprint installation, you know that you kind of have some stuff external. You have a little Octoprint server sitting outside. The fact that everything is self-contained inside of here is fantastic. We also have a 12-volt rail in the back, and we also have a 5-volt source, so you can do 5 volts and 12 volts for adding things inside of here. That is really nice. It does add a lot of flexibility, and you have a wire channel on this side along the side, and then a wire channel up the back. So you do actually have a good amount of wire maintenance for things. I will say, I'm not going to do a lot of mods to this, I think, beyond this, but there isn't really attachment points, if that makes sense. I was kind of expecting more standard, holes here and there, and like attachment points and like, rail systems or something. There really isn't that. As you can see, there's not a lot of excess screw locations anywhere. Every screw you see is already used for something and kind of blocked by something else. So there really isn't a lot of additional modifications or attachments that you can do. You kind of just got to take the mods that they have and, modify them yourself. The only thing that I did is add this little attachment for the stylus, because this kind of gets kind of small. The 4-inch is a little bit too small, the 7-inch is a little bit better, but I just added this because you're going to want to use that stylus from time to time. The price is reasonable. I think they kind of are portraying this more as a budget option, especially with the official Prusa Enclosure coming out. Prusa Enclosure. They're kind of saying, oh, this is a cheaper option. You start adding everything onto it, it starts creeping up to that price very quickly. So I don't really think this is a budget option as much as they're kind of portraying it. Once you add everything into here, once you just buy some feet and some hardware and start printing stuff, you hit that $500, I think, pretty quickly, which is about what a lot of the other ones cost. So I wouldn't say it's expensive, but I would not call this budget-minded. But other than that, I am overall pretty happy with the end result. The path to get here was not fun. So let me just kind of stand back from it and show you how it operates, and it's actually really nice. The thing that I will say is getting this plug-in and getting the whole touchscreen to work, I was maybe expecting there to be a little bit more documentation on that, like, oh, they figured it out. They have this touchscreen. They know how this thing's going to work. No, they don't hold your hand through any of the configuration of these mods. They tell you how to do all the wiring, but beyond that, it's kind of on you. So you have to figure out how to get Octoprint set up. You have to get all of the Enclosure plug-in and the power supply plug-in. You got to figure all of that stuff out. And that took me a couple weeks to just kind of dial that in. The hardware is there, and they're providing the hardware, but any of the software setup, they don't claim this, but it's not like they're giving you a plug-in to where, oh, you just load the plug-in and you can configure things. No. This is just a shell for an Octoprint with Octodash or whatever you want to load, but it took a while to kind of figure out how to configure this to work in the Enclosure. So it is a lot of effort. So yeah, let me show you how it works. We'll leave on that. Overall, I might do it again, but I would probably be looking for a commercial printer that had the Enclosure and all these features first and kind of weigh the pros and cons of the cost. So overall, I do like it. I'm happy I'm done with it, but the process and the journey was oof. So anyway, that's all I got. Thanks for watching. So in this section, I just kind of want to give you an idea of how my Octoprint setup is configured. I really don't want to go into a whole tutorial on how to set this up because it would be hours and hours long. It's actually pretty complicated, but there are a lot of resources there. I might link to some. We'll see how that goes. So this is what it looks like when you just kind of boot everything up. Octoprint loads. The Raspberry Pi is on, the screen is active, but the printer is off. The printer is connected into one of these Sonoff S31 smart plugs. This has a Tasmota firmware loaded on it. I actually have a tutorial on how to set this up, so you can go ahead and check that out. So all we do to wake up the system is just tap on the screen. You can hear a little click, this will turn on, and now this will load and connect into the printer. Give it a second. Cool, there it is. We can click on control, and then we can do all sorts of fun stuff. We can turn off the lights, turn off the lights. We can cool it down. We can hit this little fire symbol, and we can preheat it. So you can see over here, it is just preheating. Can also control the head. It's over there somewhere. So you can control the head. We can also home it, which I don't want to home it because it goes through the whole homing routine. And also we can shut this down and go back to the shutdown. If we go back in the screen, we can also do some filament stuff. I kind of like using the menu system in the Prusa for the filament, but you can also select your files and print from here. I'm not really sure why you would want to print from here. You can print directly from Prusa Slicer or the Octoprint interface, but theoretically you could just walk up to it and boom, hit the Benchy and do it that way. This is Octodash that is running. All the power stuff is running on PSU plugin. So we have the PSU plugin, but then we also have the PSU plugin with the Tasmota extension for talking to this. The lights are run off of a relay, like one of those little Raspberry Pi relays that you can get on Amazon pretty cheap. So we have it controlled through a GPIO pin here. And I think the only other plugins I have running is the Enclosure plugin to control that GPIO. So that's really kind of all there is to it, but it does take quite a bit to set up. And as I said, the heater side over here with the fan is completely separate, so there's no control whatsoever there. But this is kind of how it operates, and I have this set on an auto timer. After 30 minutes of inactivity, it will go ahead and turn off the printer and kind of shut down, or we can go into control and then force it into a standby mode just like that. And it will turn off the printer and go back into this sleep mode. Notice that the lights are still on. It doesn't turn off the lights. We gotta kind of do this little drop down thing, which is really hard to get to, and we can turn off the lights. And we can also control the lights through the interface. One side note, I really don't like controlling the lights through here because when things are printing, guess what? You can't control the lights. This menu doesn't come up when it's printing, which is really, really strange. But you can control it through the interface. This is kind of hard to get to. And then there it is. So hopefully that gives you a better idea of how this whole thing operates. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.